The Apache woman had nothing but herself, and the cowboy still let her in from the cold. The wind swept across the vast desert, carrying with it the dry, hot scent of sand and sagebrush. The sun hung low in the sky, painting the mesas and cliffs with shades of orange and red, but even this beauty could not hide the danger that lingered in the wilderness.
In the middle of this harsh land walked Ayana, a young Apache woman.
She moved carefully, her bare feet brushing against the jagged stones and dry earth. She carried nothing but the thin blanket wrapped around her shoulders and a small satchel slung over her back, worn from years of use. Inside were only a few precious items: a small knife, a handful of dried berries, and a piece of leather with her mother's handwriting, faded and almost unreadable. Ayana had been alone for days. Her family had been separated after a raid in their village. She remembered the chaos, the screams, and the smoke rising into the sky. She had hidden behind rocks and watched helplessly as her home was destroyed. Fear had carried her through the first nights, but now it was exhaustion that slowed her steps. Her stomach ached from hunger and her throat was dry. Every sound made her pause: a snapping branch, the flutter of a bird, the whisper of the wind across the canyon walls. She had learned to trust no one but herself, but even she could not deny that the cold desert night would be merciless if she did not find shelter soon. As the sun dipped behind the distant hills, the temperature dropped sharply. The wind cut through her thin blanket like a knife, and her fingers and toes began to stiffen. She wrapped herself tighter, moving faster, scanning the horizon for any sign of life or shelter. She was careful to avoid the main trails, knowing that travelers or cowboys might not welcome an Apache woman wandering alone. She had heard stories of people being cruel to those they did not understand, and yet she could not stop her steps, for staying in one place meant death. Hours passed, and the sky darkened into a deep indigo. Stars began to twinkle above, cold and distant. The desert, which had been an open expanse during the day, now felt like a maze of shadows. Ayana stumbled across rocks and dry shrubs, sometimes pausing to catch her breath or listen for the sound of water. Water had become her most precious desire. She remembered her mother teaching her how to find small streams hidden in the canyons, how to read the birds for signs of life, how to follow the paths of the animals. But the desert had changed since she had learned those lessons. She was far from the lands she once knew, and each step carried new dangers. It was then, just as she was beginning to lose hope, that she saw a faint glow in the distance. A small fire flickered against the dark sky, its light reaching her eyes like a beacon. Her heart leapt, but fear held it there. She knew that approaching strangers could be dangerous. She had been told that cowboys and travelers were unpredictable. Some would help, some would take advantage. Her hand instinctively moved to the small knife in her satchel, and she crouched behind a rock, watching. The fire grew larger as she crept closer, and she could see the shape of a small cabin near it. Smoke rose from the chimney, curling into the night sky. The scent of wood smoke and cooking meat reached her nose, making her stomach ache even more. Hunger made her desperate, but she forced herself to stay hidden. She needed to know if it was safe. Inside the cabin, a man moved quietly. Ethan, a cowboy with a rugged face lined from years in the sun and wind, tended to a small fire. He was used to being alone, but he knew the dangers of the night. He had learned to read the signs of the desert, to recognize when someone approached and when trouble was near. When he spotted the shadow of Ayana moving cautiously behind the rocks, he felt a small flicker of concern. He had seen enough of the world to know that some travelers were dangerous, but he also knew the desert could be cruel to those who wandered alone. Ethan stepped out of the cabin, holding a lantern in one hand and his rifle in the other, though it was lowered and non-threatening. "Hey!" he called softly, his voice calm but firm. "I don't want to hurt you." "Come closer." Ayana froze, her eyes wide, her body tensing. She did not speak. She had learned that words could betray weakness, and weakness could mean danger. Still, something in the man's voice made her hesitate. He didn't shout. He didn't demand. He simply offered an invitation, quiet but clear. She took a few tentative steps forward, keeping her knife hidden. Her eyes never left him, Ethan nodded slightly, encouraging her to continue. When she reached the edge of the firelight, he could see the thin blanket wrapped around her and the exhaustion etched on her face. Without a word, he gestured toward the cabin. Inside, the warmth hit her immediately. The cold that had numbed her fingers and toes began to fade. She sank to the floor near the fire, pulling the blanket closer. Ethan disappeared into the back of the cabin and returned with a bowl of warm stew. The smell alone made her stomach churn with both hunger and gratitude. She took the bowl, her hands trembling, and ate quietly, not trusting her voice yet. Ethan sat nearby, watching her but not pressing her to speak. He had learned patience from years in the desert. He knew that trust could not be forced, and he respected that. He had his own life, filled with solitude and careful routines, but tonight he would offer shelter to someone in need. The desert had taught him that compassion was not weakness, it was survival for the soul. As the night deepened, Ayana's breathing began to slow. She felt safe for the first time in days, though she did not let her guard down completely. She still wondered about the man, about why he had chosen to help her, when so many others might not. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, to share her story, but the words did not come. Instead, she simply ate and let the warmth seep into her bones, letting her body recover while her mind stayed alert. Outside, the wind continued to howl, carrying with it the loneliness and danger of the desert. But inside the cabin, there was a fragile peace. The fire crackled, casting shadows on the wooden walls. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ayana allowed herself a moment to breathe, to rest, to feel that maybe, just maybe, not all strangers were to be feared. Ethan tended the fire, moving quietly so as not to startle her. He had seen many wanderers come and go in the desert, and he knew that survival often depended on small acts of kindness. He did not expect gratitude, and he did not demand it. He only wanted to help someone who had no one else to turn to. And as he glanced at Ayana, sitting silently but safely by the fire, he felt a small spark of hope himself. Maybe the world was not as harsh as he had thought. Night deepened into early morning, and the desert outside seemed endless and uninviting. Yet inside the cabin, Ayana began to feel something she had not felt for a long time: safety. She did not know the future, nor the man who had offered her refuge, but she felt a fragile trust forming, as delicate as the firelight dancing on the walls. In the Wild West, where danger was everywhere and survival was never certain, this small moment of warmth and protection was enough to give her strength to face the coming days. The first light of dawn crept over the jagged mesas, painting the desert in soft shades of pink and gold. Ayana awoke slowly, the warmth of the cabin still wrapping around her like a fragile shield against the cold outside. Her muscles ached from the long journey the day before, and she felt the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. She looked around the small cabin, noticing the simple life that Ethan led. A few shelves lined with cooking pots, dried herbs hanging from the ceiling, and a small wooden table near the fire. Everything was tidy and practical, meant to survive in the desert rather than to impress. Ethan was already awake. He had been stirring quietly, tending to the fire so it wouldn't die while she slept. When he saw Ayana's eyes open, he offered a gentle nod. "Morning," he said. His voice was calm and steady, not demanding, not probing. "You slept well?" Ayana shook her head slightly, unsure how to answer. Sleep had been interrupted by dreams of the desert and memories she could not shake. But the warmth had helped, even if only for a little while. She gave a faint nod, clutching the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Words were still difficult. She had been alone for too long, and trust did not come easily. Ethan handed her a small bowl of porridge, warm and simple, flavored only with a touch of dried berries. She ate cautiously, taking small bites as her body adjusted to the food. He watched her, but without impatience, letting her eat at her own pace. Ayana had learned over the years that patience could be more valuable than strength in moments like these. Once she had eaten, she finally found her voice. "Water?" she asked softly. Ethan pointed toward a small barrel near the back door. "I drew some from the creek this morning. Fresh." Ayana rose slowly, her body still weak from days of wandering. She carried the bowl to the barrel, washing it carefully before drinking. The cool water burned slightly at first, then settled into a comforting relief that made her knees feel steady again. She stared outside through the cabin door at the endless desert stretching into the distance. She felt a mixture of awe and fear. The land was beautiful, with its rolling dunes, red cliffs, and distant canyons, but it was also cruel. There was no mercy for the weak, no sympathy for the lost, and yet she had survived another night. Ethan stepped outside, giving her a moment alone. "It's a long walk to the nearest settlement," he said. "You can stay here for now. You'll be safer." Ayana looked at him, trying to read his intentions. He did not ask for anything in return, did not make her feel guilty for needing shelter. That simple act of kindness struck her deeply. She had grown accustomed to suspicion and fear, but something in his calm manner made her believe, at least a little, that not everyone in the world was cruel. She nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It felt strange to speak openly, as if she were not sure she had the right to exist in someone else's space. Ethan gestured toward a small pack of blankets. "Rest as long as you need. The sun will be high soon, and the desert gets hot. We'll leave in the cooler hours if we have to move." Ayana's mind drifted back to the day before, to the long trek across the desert and the fear she had felt at every turn. She had learned to be cautious, to hide behind rocks, to observe the movements of animals and humans alike. She had survived by staying invisible, by trusting only her instincts. But here, in the warmth of this cabin, she felt something she had not felt in a long time. A fragile sense of hope. Hours passed, and the desert outside began to heat. The sun rose high, casting sharp shadows across the rocky ground. Ethan taught her small tasks around the cabin, practical things that would help her survive if she stayed. He showed her how to gather water safely, how to identify plants that were safe to eat, and how to move quietly without alerting predators or strangers. She watched and learned quickly, her mind sharp despite the weariness in her body. By mid-morning, Ayana felt strong enough to step outside for the first time since arriving. The sunlight was intense, and she shaded her eyes with her hand. The desert seemed endless, but it also seemed less frightening than before. She watched Ethan work quietly, tending to a small garden of herbs and vegetables he had managed to grow in the arid soil. The sight was comforting, a reminder that even in harsh lands, life could take root with care and patience. "You're fast," Ethan said with a hint of admiration. "I didn't think anyone could move that well after days alone in the desert." Ayana smiled faintly. "I had to survive," she replied simply. It was all she needed to say. Survival had been her only companion for as long as she could remember. As the day wore on, Ayana began to relax, though not completely. She knew the desert held dangers beyond hunger and cold. Bandits, wild animals, and the harsh elements. But here, she felt a rare sense of security. She watched Ethan as he moved around the cabin, his actions deliberate and calm. There was no unnecessary noise, no chaos, just the quiet rhythm of a man who had learned to live with the land rather than against it. In the late afternoon, a storm began to form in the distance. Dark clouds rolled over the mesas, and the wind picked up, carrying sand and dust in swirling patterns. Ayana instinctively crouched low, shielding her face. She had experienced storms before, and she knew how unforgiving they could be. But Ethan calmly began securing the cabin, tying down loose items and checking the firewood. "You'll be fine," he said, noticing her anxiety. "Storms pass. You just need to wait it out."
Ayana nodded, watching him work.
She realized that survival was not only about strength and skill, but also about understanding the land and respecting it. Ethan's calm demeanor gave her courage. She did not yet trust easily, but she trusted his knowledge. As the storm hit, rain pelted the cabin's roof and wind rattled the walls. Ayana sat close to the fire, feeling safer than she had in days. Ethan moved beside her, his presence steady but unobtrusive. They shared a quiet meal of stew while the storm raged outside, the sound of rain on the roof a strange comfort. That night, as the storm passed and the stars emerged once more, Ayana found herself opening up, just slightly. She told Ethan small fragments of her journey, of the family she had lost, of the fear and loneliness that had accompanied her across the desert. She spoke in short sentences, careful not to reveal too much, but it was more than she had shared with anyone in a long time. Ethan listened without interruption, without judgment. He did not ask her to explain herself, did not make her feel ashamed of her past. He simply offered a listening ear, and in that, Ayana felt the first flicker of trust. By the time sleep came, Ayana was exhausted but calmer. She realized that survival was no longer only about avoiding danger. It was also about finding small moments of safety, of connection, and of understanding. Ethan had shown her that kindness could exist even in the harshest desert, and that sometimes letting someone in was not weakness but strength. Outside, the desert remained vast and unforgiving, but inside the cabin, a fragile hope had taken root. Ayana understood that the journey ahead would still be dangerous, still uncertain, but she no longer felt completely alone. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to rest fully, letting the warmth of the fire and the quiet presence of the cowboy wash over her. Tomorrow she would continue her journey, stronger and wiser, and perhaps a little less afraid of the world. The sun rose slowly, casting long shadows across the desert landscape. The air was cooler than the day before, and a soft breeze carried the smell of dry earth and sagebrush. Ayana stirred from her sleep, still feeling the warmth of the fire that had kept her safe during the cold night. She yawned and stretched, noticing Ethan already moving quietly around the cabin. He was preparing a small breakfast, humming softly as he worked.
Ayana felt a strange mixture of gratitude and unease.
She was grateful for his kindness, but unease lingered because she was not used to trusting anyone. For years she had relied on herself and her instincts alone. Now here she was, in a cabin with a stranger, and the thought of depending on someone else made her heart beat faster. She forced herself to calm down, reminding herself that survival sometimes required accepting help. Ethan placed a bowl of porridge in front of her. "Eat first," he said. "We'll talk later." She nodded and took small bites, careful not to rush. The food warmed her body and gave her the strength she needed to think clearly. After a few moments, she asked, "Water?" Ethan pointed to the barrel near the back door. She went to drink, her hands steady now, and looked outside. The desert seemed endless, stretching far beyond the cabin. The sight reminded her how small and vulnerable she truly was. Yet she also realized that with shelter and knowledge she could survive. Once breakfast was finished, Ethan began teaching her more practical skills. First, he showed her how to move quietly through the desert. He explained how every step could make a difference, how snapping a twig or disturbing a small stone could alert predators, or unfriendly humans, to their presence. Ayana listened carefully, her eyes narrowing as she tried to memorize his instructions. She had been traveling alone for so long that her movements were already cautious, but Ethan's advice added a layer of precision she hadn't considered before. Next, he taught her how to find water and recognize edible plants. He pointed out a few small shrubs nearby, explaining which berries were safe and which could cause illness. "Desert plants survive harsh conditions," he said. "Some are stronger than people, but knowing which ones to trust can save your life." Ayana repeated his instructions quietly, examining each plant closely. She realized the desert had taught her many things, but there was always more to learn. Ethan had survived in this land for years, and his experience became a lesson she could not afford to ignore. As the morning passed, the wind picked up, stirring dust and sand into small whirlwinds. Ayana and Ethan moved outside to check the cabin's perimeter, making sure that nothing was loose and nothing would blow away. He showed her how to secure the roof's edges and tie down the firewood. Every motion was purposeful, deliberate, and without hurry. Ayana admired his calm confidence, realizing that it came from experience, patience, and respect for the land. Around midday, Ethan suggested they take a break. They sat in the shade of the cabin, sharing a small meal of dried meat and bread. Ayana finally felt comfortable enough to ask him about his life. "How did you survive here alone?" she asked, her curiosity cautious but genuine. Ethan looked at her, considering the question carefully. "You learn to listen to the desert," he said. "You learn its rhythm, when to move, when to rest, what to eat, and what to avoid. You respect it, and it respects you back. Being alone teaches you patience and observation, but it also teaches you that survival is about more than just strength. It's about understanding.
Ayana nodded slowly, absorbing his words.
They seemed simple but carried a depth she was beginning to understand. She realized that her own survival instincts had been strong, but she could gain much from his experience. This realization did not make her less independent, it made her stronger. As the afternoon sun climbed high, clouds began to gather on the horizon. Dark, low clouds moved quickly across the sky, and the wind shifted, carrying with it the smell of rain, or something more ominous. Ayana felt her heart tighten. Storms could be dangerous in the desert, washing away paths, filling dry creek beds with sudden torrents, and making travel nearly impossible. Ethan noticed her tension.
"Don't worry," he said calmly. "We'll be safe here."
Storms pass, and we'll wait it out. You just need to watch and listen. The sky darkened rapidly, and a few drops of rain began to fall. Ayana watched as the wind picked up, whipping sand and small debris into the air. She felt both fear and awe. The desert was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, and she was beginning to understand why survival here required more than courage. It required respect, knowledge, and the willingness to trust others when needed. When the storm hit in full force, rain pounded the cabin roof and the wind rattled the walls. Ayana huddled near the fire, feeling the warmth against her skin and the steady presence of Ethan nearby. They moved carefully around the cabin, securing windows and doors. For the first time, she realized that survival was not only about enduring hardship alone. It was also about partnership, even if that partnership was fragile and new. As the storm raged, they shared stories quietly to pass the time. Ayana spoke in small fragments about her family, the village she had lost, and the nights spent wandering alone.
Ethan listened without interrupting, asking only gentle questions to guide the conversation.
He shared moments from his own life, describing the loneliness of living in the desert and the lessons he had learned from nature, work, and people who came and went from his land. Through their conversation, a bond began to form. It was not love, not yet, but a deep respect and understanding. Ayana realized that she could survive alone, but that survival did not have to mean isolation. Ethan's calm presence showed her that people could choose kindness, even when the world was harsh and unforgiving. The storm continued into the evening, and the desert outside was transformed. Torrents of rain flowed into the dry washes, creating small rivers where none had existed before. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the rugged landscape, followed by the rolling sound of thunder. Ayana felt a thrill of fear and excitement at the raw power of nature, realizing that even the land she had feared so much could hold moments of wonder. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled, and the warmth was a stark contrast to the storm outside. Ayana began to feel a rare sense of security. She knew that once the storm passed, the desert would return to its unforgiving ways, but for now, she was safe. Ethan had provided shelter, guidance, and protection without asking for anything in return. That act alone had begun to change her view of people and trust. By nightfall, the storm had passed. The desert was quiet once more, and the stars emerged from behind the clouds. Ayana stepped outside cautiously, feeling the cool, damp air on her skin. The ground was wet and uneven, and small puddles reflected the moonlight. She felt a strange sense of renewal, as if the storm had washed away some of the fear and loneliness she carried. Ethan joined her outside, carrying a small lantern. "The storm is over," he said. "The desert is calm again, but it's a reminder this land can be harsh, but it can also give life if you know how to respect it." Ayana nodded, taking in his words. She realized that she had learned something important. Survival was not just about physical strength or cunning, but also about understanding, patience, and the willingness to trust others. She had survived many dangers alone, but with Ethan's help, she was learning that life could be less lonely and more manageable if she accepted guidance when it was offered. They returned to the cabin and settled near the fire. Ayana reflected on the day, thinking about the lessons she had learned and the bond forming between her and the cowboy who had let her in from the cold. She did not yet fully trust him, but she was beginning to understand that trust could grow slowly, and that accepting help did not make her weak. As she drifted to sleep that night, the fire burning low beside her, she felt a quiet sense of hope. The desert remained dangerous, the future uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, she felt that she was not entirely alone. With patience, skill, and the small acts of kindness shown by someone who understood the land, she could face the challenges ahead. And she knew that tomorrow would bring new lessons, new dangers, and new opportunities to grow stronger, both in body and in spirit. The morning after the storm brought a crisp, clear sky and a quiet desert. The air smelled of wet earth, and small puddles reflected the sunlight. Ayana stepped outside cautiously, feeling the ground soft beneath her feet. The storm had washed away dust and sand, leaving the desert sparkling in the morning light. For a moment she felt calm, almost at peace, but she knew that calm could be deceptive in the Wild West. Danger often came quietly, when least expected. Ethan was already moving about the cabin, checking fences and the small garden that had survived the rain. He noticed her watching and gave a small nod. "It's good to see you moving," he said. "You've gained strength." Ayana smiled faintly. "I feel stronger," she replied, "but I know the desert can change quickly." Ethan nodded. "That's true. And sometimes the danger isn't from the desert itself, but from people." Ayana's heart tightened. She had spent so long relying only on herself, wary of strangers, that the thought of human danger was always present. But now, with Ethan nearby, she felt slightly safer, though she could not let her guard down completely. As the day wore on, a shadow appeared on the horizon. At first it seemed like a small cloud, but as it grew closer, Ayana realized it was a group of riders. Their approach was deliberate, their horses kicking up dust as they rode steadily toward the cabin. Ayana felt the surge of fear. She had heard stories of bandits and bounty hunters who preyed on travelers or settlers, and she knew that their small cabin could not withstand an attack. Ethan noticed her tension. "Stay calm," he said quietly. "We'll handle this together." He moved to the door and peered out. The riders were 4 men, their faces partially covered, eyes scanning the desert. Ethan studied them carefully, noting their behavior and the distance between them. "They don't seem to be looking for trouble yet," he said, "but we need to be careful. Stay inside, out of sight." Ayana nodded, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. She felt a mix of fear and curiosity. These men could be dangerous, but she also realized that she had been through danger before and survived. Her instincts told her to stay alert, to watch, and to follow Ethan's lead. The men rode closer, circling the cabin slowly. Their horses' hooves kicked up small clouds of dust, and the sound made Ayana's heart race. She could hear their voices, low and rough, speaking in words she didn't fully understand. Ethan remained calm, moving silently to secure the cabin's doors and windows. He checked the small garden, making sure nothing would draw attention or give away their presence. Ayana watched him, feeling a growing respect. He did not panic. He did not shout or make sudden movements. Every action was precise, measured, and purposeful. She realized that courage was not always loud or flashy. It could be quiet and steady, like the way he moved through the cabin and prepared for the approaching danger. The riders lingered near the cabin, looking for any sign of life. Ayana held her breath, hoping they would move on. But one of the men spotted a trail of footprints in the soft earth, leading to the cabin door. He pointed and shouted, alerting the others. Ayana felt a surge of fear. She had hoped to remain unnoticed, but now it seemed impossible. Ethan stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "We don't want trouble," he called. "Go your way, and you'll be safe." The men laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. One of them dismounted, approaching the cabin cautiously. Ethan remained steady, hands visible, showing he carried no threat. Ayana could feel the tension in the air, thick and almost suffocating. She gripped the small knife in her satchel, ready to defend herself if needed. but also trusting Ethan's judgment. The man paused at the cabin door, glancing inside. Ethan spoke again, offering words that were firm yet respectful. "There's nothing here for you. Leave now, and you won't be harmed." For a tense moment, no one moved. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Then, after a few moments of hesitation, the rider gave a sharp laugh and signaled to the others. They mounted their horses and rode off, leaving dust and small rocks in their wake. Ayana's heart was still racing, but she realized that they had survived without conflict. She turned to Ethan, who gave her a small, reassuring nod. "See," he said, "not every threat leads to harm. Sometimes people test boundaries." We stayed calm, and we were prepared. Ayana exhaled slowly, realizing the truth in his words. She had survived alone before, but now she understood that strength could also come from strategy, patience, and working with someone who knew the land. This encounter had tested them both, but they had emerged unscathed. The rest of the day passed with caution. Ethan and Ayana checked the cabin and surrounding area, making sure no tracks were left that might lead others to them. Ayana observed everything, learning not only the practical skills of survival but also the subtle art of reading people, understanding their intentions, and knowing when to act and when to wait. By evening, the desert was calm once more. The sun set in shades of red and gold, casting long shadows over the rocky terrain. Ayana and Ethan sat outside, sharing a quiet meal. The events of the day weighed on them both, but there was a sense of accomplishment. They had faced danger together and had come through stronger. Their trust in each other deepened. Ayana spoke softly, breaking the silence. "You were very brave today," she said. "I don't think I could have done what you did." Ethan shook his head. "You would have. You just needed someone to guide you. And bravery isn't just about facing danger. It's about staying calm, making smart choices, and protecting what matters." Ayana thought about his words. She realized that she had been brave all along, surviving alone in the desert for days, finding food and water, and navigating harsh terrain. But bravery with someone else, courage shared, was a different kind of strength. She felt a sense of gratitude toward Ethan, not only for his protection but also for helping her understand that trust and courage could coexist. Night fell, and the stars emerged, shining brightly over the desert. Ayana sat by the fire, feeling the warmth on her skin and the steady presence of Ethan beside her. The events of the day had left her exhausted, but they had also taught her important lessons. She understood that the desert was full of challenges, both from nature and from people, but that knowledge, preparation, and careful observation could tip the balance in favor of survival. As she drifted to sleep that night, she felt a growing sense of connection, not just to Ethan, but to the land itself. The desert had tested her in countless ways, and it would continue to do so, but she was no longer entirely alone. Together they had faced danger and survived. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as it always did, but Ayana now understood that trust and courage were tools as vital as any knife or water supply. For the first time since she had wandered into the desert, she allowed herself a moment of peace. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be more storms, more threats, and more moments that tested her endurance and strength. But she also knew that she had learned something invaluable. Survival was not only about being strong alone. It was about knowing when to lean on another, when to listen, and when to act with patience and wisdom. And so, under the quiet light of the stars, with the desert stretching endlessly around them, Ayana felt a small spark of hope. She was stronger, wiser, and beginning to understand that even in the harshest wilderness, people could choose kindness, courage, and trust, and that those choices could change everything. The desert morning was calm, the kind of stillness that came after a storm and a day of tension. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, painting the sky with soft gold and pale pink. Ayana stretched carefully, feeling her muscles stronger and her body more capable than when she first wandered into the harsh wilderness. She wrapped her blanket around her shoulders, not because she needed warmth, but because it had become a small comfort, a reminder of her journey and her survival. Ethan was already outside, tending to the cabin and the small garden he had worked so hard to maintain. He glanced up at her, offering a quiet nod. "Good morning," he said. "You look ready for the day." Ayana returned the nod, a faint smile crossing her face. "I think I am," she replied. Her voice felt steadier now, carrying the confidence that came from days of surviving, learning, and trusting someone else for the first time in a long while. The day ahead was quiet, but both knew the desert had a way of testing patience. They moved carefully, checking the cabin for any signs of the riders from the day before. There were no traces left, only faint hoof prints washed away by the rain. Ayana felt a wave of relief. She had been anxious, fearing that danger would return at any moment. But now she realized that the desert, while harsh, also rewarded those who prepared and observed carefully. Ethan taught her small, practical tasks, things she had not yet mastered. How to identify the safest paths through the rocky terrain, how to store water properly to prevent evaporation, and how to preserve food in the dry heat. Ayana listened attentively, her mind absorbing every detail. Survival was no longer just instinct. It was knowledge, patience, and respect for the land. After their work, they paused to eat a small meal of bread, dried meat, and fresh herbs from the garden. They sat side by side, sharing the simple food in silence for a while. Ayana felt a deep sense of calm, a rarity for her. She had been alone for so long, moving through the desert without shelter or guidance, that moments like this felt almost unreal. But she was beginning to understand that strength was not just about enduring hardship alone. It was also about connection, trust, and shared effort. As the sun climbed higher, they prepared to venture beyond the immediate vicinity of the cabin. Ayana had grown curious about the land, eager to learn more about the desert that had both challenged and sustained her. Ethan guided her carefully, showing her landmarks, teaching her how to read the signs of the terrain, and pointing out small details that could mean the difference between safety and danger. Ayana absorbed everything, asking questions, observing, and trying out his advice. She learned to move with precision, to notice patterns in the wind and the movement of animals, and to judge when a path was safe or potentially hazardous. Each lesson increased her confidence, and she realized that she had grown stronger, not only in body, but in mind. By mid-afternoon, they returned to the cabin, tired but satisfied. Ayana felt a sense of pride she had not experienced before. She was no longer just surviving. She was learning to live in the desert, to understand its rhythms, and to navigate its challenges with skill and awareness. Ethan watched her quietly, sensing the growth in her that went beyond physical strength. She had endured hardships that would have broken many, yet she had emerged resilient, thoughtful, and cautious, without losing her spirit. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Ayana and Ethan sat outside the cabin once more. The sky was painted with deep oranges and purples, casting long shadows across the desert floor. They shared another quiet meal, and for a moment the world felt simple and safe, a rare feeling in the Wild West. Ayana spoke softly, her voice carrying a mixture of gratitude and reflection. "I have survived a long time alone," she said. "But I have learned more in these few days with you than I could have ever learned by myself." Ethan nodded, his expression calm but thoughtful. "Survival is more than endurance," he replied. "It's knowledge, respect, and sometimes trust. You've grown stronger, not just because of what you've done alone, but because you were willing to learn, to observe, and to accept help when it was offered." Trust had been foreign to her for so long, a fragile and dangerous thing, but now she understood that it could be a source of strength rather than weakness. She had trusted Ethan, and in doing so she had not only survived but had grown in ways she could not have imagined. The evening passed quietly. They worked together to secure the cabin, gather firewood, and prepare a small meal. Ayana felt a sense of satisfaction in their teamwork. She realized that the bond between them had grown beyond simple survival. It was rooted in respect, understanding, and shared experience. She no longer felt completely alone, and that realization gave her a deep sense of hope. As night fell, the stars emerged, glittering across the clear desert sky. Ayana sat near the fire, feeling the warmth on her face and the steady presence of Ethan beside her. The events of the past days, The storms, the riders, the harsh terrain had left their mark on her, but they had also strengthened her. She had faced fear, learned new skills, and discovered that trust could exist even in the harshest circumstances. Ethan looked at her quietly, noticing the calm determination in her eyes. He had seen many travelers pass through the desert, many who had been strong and independent, but few had displayed the combination of courage, intelligence, and resilience that Ayana had shown. He felt a quiet respect for her, not just for her survival, but for her ability to learn, adapt, and remain strong in spirit. Ayana finally spoke, her voice steady and thoughtful.
"I will leave this place one day," she said, "but I will not forget what I have learned."
"I will not forget your kindness." Ethan nodded, understanding her words.
"And you should not forget your strength," he said. "You have survived alone, you have faced danger, and you have grown wiser."
"The desert will test you, but it has also shown you that you can endure." They sat together in silence for a while, listening to the soft sounds of the desert night, the distant call of a coyote, the rustle of wind through the rocks, and the crackling of the fire. Ayana felt a sense of peace she had not known in years. She realized that survival was not only about enduring the harshness of life, but also about finding moments of safety, learning from others, and trusting when it mattered most. As she drifted towards sleep, Ayana reflected on her journey. She had entered the desert alone, with nothing but her instincts and courage. She had faced storms, hunger, and human threats. She had learned to read the land, to observe and anticipate danger, and to work with someone else to navigate challenges. Most importantly, she had discovered that trust and connection could be as vital to survival as skill and endurance. Ethan remained awake a little longer, tending the fire and keeping watch over the cabin. He understood the importance of these moments for both of them, not just for safety, but for building a foundation of respect, understanding, and quiet companionship. He had seen many people come and go, but Ayana had left an impression on him. Her courage, resilience, and willingness to learn had reminded him that even in a harsh world, kindness and trust could flourish. The desert was vast and unforgiving, but within the small cabin and around the fire a fragile hope had taken root. Ayana had survived, learned, and grown stronger, and Ethan had found a companion who understood the value of patience, observation, and quiet courage. Together they had faced the challenges of the Wild West, and together they had emerged wiser and more capable. When dawn came again, the desert was bathed in soft light. Ayana stood outside the cabin, looking over the vast landscape. She felt a sense of readiness and strength that had been absent when she first arrived. She knew the road ahead would still be filled with challenges, but she also knew that she had learned lessons that would carry her through, lessons of survival, courage, and the importance of trust. She turned to Ethan, who was gathering firewood. "Thank you," she said simply. Ethan gave her a small nod.
"You've done the hard part yourself," he replied. "I just showed you a way to make it easier."
"Remember, the desert tests everyone. But with patience, courage, and trust, you can face anything." Ayana smiled faintly. The words carried more weight than any comfort she had known in years. She realized that she had changed, not just because of what she had survived, but because of what she had learned about herself, about others, and about the harsh yet beautiful land around her. The sun climbed higher, and the desert shimmered with heat and light. Ayana felt ready to continue her journey, not just as a survivor, but as someone who understood the balance between strength, knowledge, and trust. She knew that her life would continue to hold challenges, but she also knew that she was no longer entirely alone. She had found an ally, a teacher, and a friend, and with that she carried a spark of hope that would guide her through the days to come.